beginning of a Kairos event in Ottawa with Terry and others as a prelude to the delivery of the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I was there to listen and to learn. For those of you who may not know, the mandate of Kairos is to unite Canadian churches and religious organizations in a faithful ecumenical response to the call of Micah 6, to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. So Kairos is an organization that advocates for social change and empowers people. And as a church in Canada and a member of this place, we are partnered with Kairos. This morning we're presented with images of lofty trees and immense mustard bushes that are green and lush and magnificent, particularly so because they make room for all the birds of the air and their nests called home. This image invites us to look at the world from a certain perspective. A large tree with room for every bird imaginable presents a poignant picture. Of course, it's a metaphor. The prophets communicate this way in order to paint an ambitious picture of the road we are traveling and the hope-filled destination that calls us forward. We're on a journey, and we yearn for a place, a nation, a planet, a universe in which there is shelter for all, a place that each can call home. And in our circles, we might call that Kingdom of God. In other circles, it has other names. Our communal movement towards this future seeks a rebalancing wherein the first and the last will at least meet in the middle, or maybe a bit towards the last on that spectrum. A space that is made for all, justice, peace. And that's why at this particular time in history in which we are alive, the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has been and is so important. We have heard, if we have been listening, the truth of the atrocious cultural genocide directed towards Aboriginal people. And this history informs our present moment. At this particular time, in the life of Canada, and in your life and my life, we continue this journey of listening and learning about the truth of this relationship and the reconciliation required. Canada's First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities have not been and are not given space and room within the shade of the tree. And worse yet, we have tried to eliminate them, take the Indian out of the Indian, make them white, extinguish them, make them extinct. We have so much less than not honored, nor do we honor these generous First Nations people. We have pushed them instead to the margins, putting them on reserves, stealing, incarcerating, abusing, and apparently watching, or worse, as some 6,000 of their children died in residential schools. Today, we still do not enable appropriately funded education, or how about something as basic as clean drinking water. We take advantage of them. We do not sit at their feet to soak in their sacred relationship with the earth, the water, and the air. Instead, our final solution, birthed out of our political and economic interests, has seen us taking over their home for fishing, logging, farming, and mining. We have used their land to make us money And in so doing, we have really messed things up, forcing human beings into situations where coping with distress, the distress that we have created in their lives, has meant alcoholism, suicide, many other mental health challenges. We have wasted and not cared for the earth, air, and water, creating our present environmental crises. We have a government of people who refuse to check into missing and murdered Indigenous women, or who won't place our considerable financial resources at the service of providing at the least potable drinking water in some 160 Aboriginal communities. The pain of all this, the immensity of the loss, we only touched the fringes of. It was palpable as we sat and listened and learned some 2 weeks ago in Ottawa.
Attending the Truth and Reconciliation Commission event in Ottawa made me reflect on my experiences while attending the File Hills Residential School for 3 years, from 1947 to 1949. I would like to share some of these experiences with you and tell you some of the stories told to me by my parents, because these stories go to the heart of the general attitudes towards First Nations people at the time. While I attended the File Hills School, I was able to go home after school. The Aboriginal children were not. I was able to sit down to eat with my family foods that were familiar to me. The Aboriginal children were not. I was able to speak the same language as my parents. Aboriginal children were not. In fact, they were punished if they were caught. It wasn't until later as an adult that I came to better understand how these differences changed the courses of our lives. As I said, I got to go home every night and be with my parents, which meant I had the love and security of my mother and father every day. I ate my meals at home. I spent time with my brother and grew up knowing what a loving, close family unit meant. The Aboriginal children did not have these experiences, and the results on their communities have been devastating. I'd like to share with you 2 stories told to me by my parents. The first, by my mother. The occasion was a powwow, and as a family we attended, much to the chagrin of the school administrator, who regarded this event as a heathen ceremony. My mother was approached by Mrs. Stonechild, one of the mothers, whose 2 boys attended the school with me. My mom thought they would have a nice chat about the boys in school, till Mrs. Stonechild said, "Your boy can go home after school, and mine can't. And it's because your son is white." Then she asked my mother this question: "Do you think I love my boys less than you love yours?" My mother's response was, "Of course not, but I don't make the rules." An answer which she knew was completely unsatisfactory. The question Mrs. Stonechild asked tells us about the pain felt by our First Nations brothers and sisters at the loss of their children, sometimes for months at a time. This next story comes from my father. It was a cold January day, and my father and Mr. Wilderman, the maintenance man, were doing some work outside. They had recruited 3 of the older boys to help them. About mid-morning, the matron came out to tell my dad that she had made tea and sandwiches for him, so my father called the other 4 to come in for the break. The matron stopped my dad and said that only he and Mr. Wilderman could come in, not the boys. Aboriginal children were only allowed in the dining room at mealtime. My father turned on the matron and told her that if they were good enough to do the work in the cold with him, they were good enough to come in for tea and sandwiches. And at this point, my father escorted the 3 boys in. 2 weekends ago, while attending the Kairos TRC event in Ottawa, on the Saturday afternoon, we broke up into workshops. One of these was called The Healing Journey of a Former RCMP Officer. I attended this one. He tells the following story. In 1965, as a young officer stationed in the Northwest Territories, I was asked by the Indian agent to come and help him get 2 girls who were to be sent south to a residential school. One of the girls was 5, the other 7. When we arrived at the home, I had to literally take the 5-year-old out of her crying mother's arms to take them to the waiting airplane. I didn't even know their names. And to this day, I don't know what happened. This event haunted me, and eventually I applied to purchase my way out of the force. I simply could not do this kind of thing again. I was eventually given permission to purchase my way out of the RCMP, but the event continued to bother me so much that I had to seek counseling, and eventually turned to First Nations healing circles and sweat lodges, which are of great help to me. I know that this type of incident happened many times over the years, and I couldn't help but wonder at how many other officers were affected by having to take children away from their homes. On Sunday, along with other members of our congregation, Cheryl and her family, Tamara, Pastor Tom and Mary Ann, Petra and her daughter, I was honored to take part in the 5-kilometer walk in support of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The walk started in Gatineau, Quebec, and ended at Ottawa's City Hall. What struck me was the commitment of the walkers. Beside us were 2 elderly men, one with 2 walking canes. Just ahead of us was a gentleman who was struggling with a severe limp. But all of us were determined to finish. We all felt the importance of showing our support for all of the survivors of the residential schools. It was an inspiring sight.
We need to grow a tree, but we must not look for its seed within our own ingenuity. No, it is our wisdom that has gotten us into this mess. Turns out the solution is embedded in giving Canada's First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities space. No longer shoving them over the edge, but actually honoring them with front and center attention. David Suzuki, as recently as June 8th in the Vancouver Sun, was quoted this way: "So long as we continue to let the economy and political priorities shape the discussion, we will fail in our efforts to find a sustainable future." I've been trying to tell business folk and politicians that in the battle over the Northern Gateway, what First Nations are trying to tell us is that their opposition is because there are things more important than money. We need to grow a tree, and the Aboriginal people have its seed. For me, there was a most poignant moment at the Kairos event on the Friday evening. One of the presenters, Michael Kachagi, former president of the National Residential Schools Survivor Society, spoke of his residential school experience. He suggested that it was not the inadequate food that was the worst of the experience, nor the abuses that he had to put up with. By far, the most difficult experience for him was being separated from his parents. Slowly and methodically, he spoke of what it was like to not be hugged by his mother or father for some 10 to 12 years, not to be told, "I love you." And then it struck me, in my therapy practice, I am aware of the relationships with parents and children, and the children who did not experience a safe and secure environment while they were growing up, and how that experience impacts the child's adult life with devastating symptoms like anxiety or depression or OCD, or the list goes on. And then it struck me, here is an entire nation of children removed from their safe and secure environment and their loving parents, and thrust into an environment where they could not even, we can't imagine this, speak their own language or be involved in their family tradition or their spirituality, where they did not know a mother's embrace or a father's loving words. Trauma, like beyond trauma. And then even more poignant was Dr. Marie Wilson's initial words when she began her presentation and turned towards Mike Kachagi and spoke softly and quietly with incredible intensity to him these words: "I see you, I hear you, I believe you." And then to witness Mike quietly crying. He is still healing, always will be, I imagine. Great seed that he is. Last Tuesday when I visited with Terry and Phyllis, Phyllis said it best, I think. She says, "We look the other way. How rude is that?" It's time. I don't know how to contribute yet, but I know it's beyond the time for me to say, "I see you, I hear you, I believe you." You? How can we create space? How can we listen and learn? One tree and many First Nations seeds.
your